Welcome to TheSystem.ca, the art and science of coaching, providing innovative information on new speed, power, recovery, wellness, strength, and conditioning for both athletes and active individuals.
Businessman. So how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Very good, man. You doing?
Were you in a storage room?
Close enough. This is my apartment. This is the spare bedroom. So this is where I put all my. My wife doesn't allow me to put all my books in the living room. So basically, I have to put them all here. So this is where all the deep thinking happens in one sense.
I understand that.
Yeah. So it's not interesting when you come over. When people come over to your house and they see all this stuff. They don't see the Norman Rockwell.
Yeah.
On they see stuff on how to improve your 40.
I know how that is.
So, anyways, so basically, let me give us a little intro to the listeners, because some may know, some may not know, but Coach Joe Kenn is the 2002 NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year. He was also in 2013, he was the NSCA Professional Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year. And in 2015, he was a professional football coach, strength and conditioning coach of the year. So we're looking at we're talking to a heavyweight more than one way, more than one respect. Yeah. So I got to ask you, just to kind of on a lighter note, how'd you get the name House? I mean, is it something that you coined, or is it something?
No, I didn't. It's not self-coined.
Okay.
I actually did a post on this. I think it was 1986. I came back from winter break, and back then in college football in the States, there wasn't 100 bowl games, so it was very, very hard to get to a bowl game back in those days. And we didn't have a winning record, so obviously you're not going to go. But we didn't get to go to any bowl games while I was a college athlete. If I was playing in this generation, I'd have went to 3. So it shows you how different the games have changed and the rules have changed. So we were always home for what could be up to 6 weeks at a time, from the time that finals ended, depending on how you did your finals, versus when we started back the semester. So I was always an advocate of strength training, and in my area, there was some pretty good guys to look up to. So I'd go home, and most guys, are hanging out for 6 weeks, and I was training as hard as I would have trained at any point in time, maybe even harder, because of the surrounding environment and the types of guys that I was training with. Because when you go home, you're either going to train with your lifting buddies, right, they're always on point, or you're going to train with some of your fellow teammates that go to different colleges. So then it becomes a competitive nature also. So one way or the other, you're not going in the gym to just walk your way and schmooze yourself through a session. And I've been adamant to tell people I'm not an athlete. I was a very good football player who worked hard at those skills that allowed me to play a sport. I'm the athleticism, general KPIs. That's not who I was. I made myself an average athlete and a above average football player by work ethic, listening, doing the fundamentals right, and just trying to outwork people. So for me to go home and train for 6 weeks, 5-6 days a week, that was not an issue. So when I came back, I had put on some pretty good size that year. And I should also say, I was a younger athlete. Like, I went to college, I was only 17 years old, my first year of college. So
okay,
I was still growing. And so I'm in my third year of school, and I'm just turning 20. So there was a lot to go on. And so I came back, and I walked in the dorm. There was a big party already started, welcome back party. I walk in the dorm, like literally right off the airplane. And one of my buddies goes, "Damn, man, you got as big as a house. For a break." and it kind of stuck, and there you have it.
So what position you played, or positions
So
in
I got
football?
recruited I played offensive defensive line in high school, which you very rarely hear about now. And I got recruited by most schools as an offensive lineman. Wake Forest gave me a chance to start off on defense, and anybody who plays line knows you want to start off on defense, right? So I went in as a defensive lineman. I wound up getting hurt early in my career, and I ended up playing offensive line my last 2 years of college.
Okay. All right. So that is something I've kind of watched some of your interviews, and I figured maybe anybody never asked him.
Yeah.
So the question here is, the expression is that great people stand on the shoulders of giants. So who were your mentors, and who are they now?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I'm a big believer in this generation of strength and conditioning professionals, performance professionals, not doing a very good job of studying that history. And I don't think some of them even know who those giants are, right? And
I agree.
It's a little disappointing.
Yes.
I was very fortunate to be exposed to a lot of different things early before I really realized that I was going to wind up being a strength coach. So my high school coach was well beyond anybody in the early 80s with organized strength and conditioning at the high school level. And we had a variation of the Penn State model, which was high intensity, and what they were doing at Maryland, because that's where his college football coach at the time was coaching, and they were doing free weight oriented stuff. So it was a very unique. I didn't know what the hell we were doing. Obviously, I'm in high school. I'm just doing what I'm told. But as I learned more, it was kind of a cool, unique perspective, because we did the big classical structural lifts as a typical, 5x5 and things like that.
Right.
But all of our accessory work was to like 1 set to failure, 2 sets to failure. So it was a good combination at that age to develop some pretty good habits on how to train. One of those habits that picked up in college was my college strength coach was a high intensity based strength trainer, and that strength coach. And that's why to this day, I have a very hard time of doing incomplete full range of motion reps. I'm very meticulous on the eccentric, even though at times you shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of led to that. So early on would be my high school coach, my college strength coach, because then obviously I'm getting an understanding of, wow, this is a career. And who else to look up to than the guy who's your college strength coach when you didn't even know that was a real job. And then I've been real fortunate that in the early 80s, unlike it was now with the internet, you literally had to write people or cold call them to get information. And
Sounds
as
familiar.
as a young up and coming strength coach, I sent out a lot of letters to see if I could get a hand on summer programs from colleges to study. And even back then, I don't think that was against the rules. I don't think you were allowed to send things to coaches. But fortunately for me, while I was a high school strength coach down at Pinecrest Prep, several coaches reached out to me and sent me their summer programs. And 2 of them in particular were Mike Gentry, who was at Virginia Tech at the time, and John Gamble, who was at the University of Virginia. So right away, obviously, they were my mentors from afar and didn't even know it. I mean, I tried for a long time to get on staff with Mike Gentry because twofold story with Coach Gentry. One, his college program was the first program I'd ever seen in high school, because when he was at East Carolina, one of my teammates got a scholarship from East Carolina, and they sent him the summer program. So that was the very first time I'd seen a college strength and conditioning program. And then later in my career, when we had a coaching change at Wake, Bill Dooley came from Virginia Tech and was trying to bring Coach Gentry with him. And at that point in time, I started understanding strength and conditioning. And Mike Gentry, who's now a legend across the board, but in the South, his name was legendary for training guys like Terry Long at East Carolina. He was at North Carolina. And then when he went to Virginia Tech, he had a 30-plus year, almost a 30-year run there with Coach Frank Beamer. So he's a legend. Those two guys really kind of opened my eyes to program design. And then obviously I have to give a lot of credit to Ron Thompson for giving me my first opportunity in strength and conditioning coaching. Keith Flynn gave me my first coaching job at Pinecrest. I coached football, wrestling, and the weight room. But Ron gave me a creative freedom, which he didn't have to. He gave me the opportunity to explore with the sports that I was assigned at Boise State. And I just kept building my repertoire of study. I mean, I've studied the programs. I mean, I can't, there's guys out there that people didn't even know that, Rock Gullickson will be known for his work in the NFL, but yet Rock Gullickson sent me a program when he was the strength coach at Montana State. Kevin Yoxel was the guy who offered me my first college job and then helped me get to Boise State. And now we're on the same team at Dynamic. Alan Johnson, who was at West Virginia at the time. Jeff Connors, who was at East Carolina the first time. Rob Oviatt. I mean, all these guys I looked up to and studied, and they helped formulate who I am and what I try to aspire to be to others today. I know I've met Coach Parker, Johnny Parker, legend, Al Miller, legend. These guys are just legendary people that I think the people who understand where we came, Boyd Epley. I mean, the funny thing is, and I always say this even to the younger generation, is Boyd wasn't the first strength coach, so to say. He was the first one that understood what it could be when he got the role, and he created a career for how many people, right? And I say the same thing because I watched the growth and I watched the development of what Mark Verstegen did with Athletes Performance in Phoenix in the early 2000s. When I arrived on campus, he was just getting the API facility built on our campus. And again, was he the first private sector coach of elite athletes? No. But those two individuals in particular had the vision and the capabilities because of what they were surrounded by to exploit a situation and create such a big asset to athletes. They created careers that now total thousands of coaches now because of those people either on the university setting and now in the private sector. I mean, when we both started, if you were in the private sector, you were a personal trainer. I mean, nowadays there's a distinct difference between a private sector elite coach or an athletic performance specialist versus a personal trainer. It's two different distinct careers. And I think we have to do a better job of telling the younger generation who are in the private sector to promote themselves as private sector coaches rather than personal trainers. And that's a genre of terms that we've also got to get the parents and the kids in the private sector to address it that way. Because a lot of times they'll just say, oh, I'm going to my trainer today. But it's really your coach. He just doesn't happen to be a team coach in the team setting. So I've been real fortunate to be able to make a lot of relationships because I understood the amount of respect that I needed to give to these people who were showing me the way, and they didn't even know they were showing me the way. And I think that's one of the things that I aspire to be to the individuals who have worked with me at various staffs and for the individuals who haven't worked with me that I've been fortunate to study my work and think there's value in it.
Yeah. And then I want to kind of add here, I called you, I can't remember, about 15 maybe years ago.
It might even be more than that because it was in the 90s. I was still at Boise State.
Yeah, that's right. And I ended up getting your book, and I can't remember how I got your book. But anyways, all I remember is that that book is no longer legible because the amount of ink that's in it now. So I ended up photocopying it, and then
Well, I'll send you another one. Send me your address. I'll send you a clean version.
So anyways, I ended up photocopying because there was no more room to write in it. So, and then I remembered I called you because I figured I couldn't understand a few of the terms. And I figured, let me call this guy up and let's see, if he's, and I remember we had a great conversation. And by the way, I consider you what you've done in terms of strength and conditioning, and I consider you kind of like a performance enhancement specialist, not necessarily conditioning strength S&C coach. You have a broader perspective, in my opinion. That's one of the reasons I kind of brought you on the podcast, because I want to tell the readers, listen, it's not just about barbells, man. And you sort of integrated this system, which when I was reading it, I'm thinking, wow, this guy's thinking. He's thinking on a much bigger level here. He's not thinking about A and B. He's thinking about A plus Z plus, and you have this outcome. And so I want to, I consider you one of my mentors, and I definitely read a lot of your stuff and watch some of your interviews and stuff. But tell us about your working experience here at college versus the high school versus the professional ranks. And what I mean by that, in terms of the input you had with the athletes. I mean, were you in high school? It seems like you have a little bit more control, whereas at professional level, I don't know. Okay, I mean, I work with a few pros, and it's a little different.
Yeah, and you're right. It is different. Team sport. If you are involved in a team sport setting where you work for an organization or a specific team, it is a lot different than coaching that same person in the private sector. One thing that's kind of my pet peeve is when individuals try to come out, especially in this day and age, and say, well, if I was there, I'd be doing this. Well, then take your shot, come in there and do this, because if I was where you're at, I wouldn't be training these guys necessarily the same way either. We're under such the time restraints alone make you really have to spend a lot of time on, what's useful and what's useless, right?
Yeah.
And be very, very fluid. The differences in the groupings are in the I would say you're going to, the word I use the term when I talk to coaches in the professional level, you can't be rigid in the professional level for a lot of reasons.
Yes.
One, athletically, genetically, professionally, they've earned a voice. And there's certain aspects that you've got to know how to deal with that. Also, now you're looking at a concept where from high school and college, you get these kids as freshmen and you develop a 4 to 5 year plan where you have the true, what I call quadrennial plan, or a mini long-term athletic development cycle to get these guys through. These pro guys could be gone in a week, could be with you 9 years, like some of them have been, and then you bring in free agents from other teams. So the evaluation process, really, there's a lot of things, and I've had notes as I've sat out this year of evaluating the athlete and what that would all entail. And one of them would be, first, once we've got through all the anthropometric things and the injuries and what year there are in the NFL, then we start looking at it from training plans. And because you're only dealing with 60 and they're very, very highly motivated, you can literally do more of that. When people go, oh, we're going to write individual strength training programs for guys, and you got 120 football players, give me a break. You're not writing 120. Now, in this day, I mean, you are in some respects, because if you use percentages, it's percentages of their max. In this day and age, a lot of people use data analytics like velocity based and measuring speed. And so that's manipulated individually. But most of the time, the programming is going to be similar depending on what group you are. In the NFL, we started with the same way. We have a base model for certain groups. And then from there, it's a big discussion depending on the athlete's experience, where the athlete trained as a college athlete. And then if he comes in as a free agent, where did he come from? What is he used to doing? And then it comes to how long have they been in the NFL? Because there's no sense of fighting a 10-year plus vet if he comes to your team later in your career. It really becomes down to what are the things you've done in the past, figuring out how that fits into your template.
Yes.
And then letting them know that, hey man, we're here for you. The program is so fluid. We've had a lot of vets. I pride myself that we had a lot of vets, and I say the word vet friendly. I'm not giving in. They're not dictate. It's a constant flow of communication. Vet friendly means tell me what you like, and I'll make sure we do the best we can to get it into the program. And that's the one good thing about the way we model. If you give me your favorite exercises, I can plug them into our program and sequencing in so that you are on the same standard as the other guys in your position group, but it's going to look a little different. Not everybody's going to back squat. Not everybody's going to front squat. Not everybody's going to belt squat. But whatever that squatting pattern that you prefer on squat day, that's your preferred squat pattern. So
Simple.
it just builds, it's simplicity. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's just called communication and knowing that.
Yes.
The one thing that we have to realize, and we're talking, right now about one aspect of development is in the weight room, is there's a lot of times that I think younger strength coaches, I think nowadays it's talked about more, but here's what we got to remember. And this is the thing about why we developed the plan that we did is we were following models of sport. When we first got into this profession, everybody, except for the high intensity guys, they actually were a little bit ahead, I think, as far as the thought process of what they were trying to accomplish when it came to strength training for non-lifters. But the free weight approach, we were just delving into 3 disciplines of training: powerlifting, weightlifting, and bodybuilding in the early 80s and 90s.
That's
and
right.
We were just reciprocating those programs to the athletes. Now, structure is better than unstructured. So obviously it had certain positivities to it. But what happened was you dive too much into training a sport with a sport, you're losing different modalities and different indicators that the other sports can give you. So,
Agreed.
and again, very general concepts. I like to speak very general. Weightlifting, explosive strength. Powerlifting, absolute strength.
Yes.
Bodybuilding, hypertrophy, lean body mass. Well, what athlete doesn't need all 3 of those? So
Exactly.
for you to lean on one of those strength sports, or what I call strength disciplines, to develop an athlete, he's going to gain success, but is he going to gain absolute performance success? And we have to also remember when we're in there is when I walk in the weight room as a competitive powerlifter, that's my practice field.
Yes.
When a team sport athlete, or an individual-based athlete that does an Olympic type of sport walks into the weight room, that's secondary. They may be coming in after practice, or they may be coming in on days they don't practice, but they don't understand the value like a lifter does when they walk in the weight room. And we have to be constantly aware of that. I don't think a lot of times early on in this profession, we were aware of that, and we were trying to ask them to give the same amount of effort they were giving in their sporting fields when they were at practice, and you can't. I'm not telling you I don't want a very good, effort, but I got to also understand that why are they really here? And I learned that from athletes. Some of the best athletes I coached that are going to wind up being in the NFL Hall of Fame were not my best weight room guys. And guess what? They didn't have to be.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So you have to you have to realize that. And the earlier you realize that in your career, I think the more success you'll have when you're trying to figure out the plans. College, a lot more developmental. You have a lot more say in the programming. You hope, again, early in my career, as in most people, everybody did the same program regardless of year. I think it's starting to develop more and more. We started a big change in the early 2000s with rebuilding off of years of service, so to speak, and giving the athletes more chance to adapt and then readapt to new stimulus throughout a 5-year period, instead of what we used to hear, and I'm sure you used to hear it too, Yusuf, is back when we started, everybody did the same workout. So you'd always hear about, well, after 3 years in a program, the athlete's just going to maintain from then out. We can't get them any better. Well, that's because we didn't change the adaptation and we didn't change the response. I think as we learned, now we would call that lazy coaching. But back then we just did. Back then it was what it was, right?
Yeah.
It was like, hey man, this is the program and this is what we do, and that's the great thing. Again, I tell people all the time, the greatest thing about training athletes that don't participate in lifting sports is there's no right way to do it.
Yes.
Because in the end, it's just a supplemental factor to them being excessively good at the sport they're in. This isn't about a 1,000-pound squat for an offensive lineman is not going to make him a Hall of Fame offensive lineman. So there's certain levels of strength. Strength is always a key, right? But there's so many adjectives that you can place in front of strength that need to be developed. Like I always say, I'll always be preferable to a bilateral squat as my tier 1 movement. But I also know how much greater the importance of single leg movements in various planes and various loading parameters are to athletics. I think that the combination of both is important. I shouldn't say has to be, right? Because it doesn't have to be. But there's some merit in doing bilateral movements, but there's a tremendous amount of benefit for an athlete to understand all the planes of movement with pseudo single leg or pure single leg type actions. That's just one part. Just like barbell pressing. Yeah, we're going to do some barbell pressing, but we're going to do a tremendous amount of independent limb pressing also, because that's how most mechanics are developed when it comes to developing athletes. And that's the biggest thing about developing your exercise pool. I love when people talk about sport-specific programs. Are there some uniquenesses to certain sports when it comes to what I call the protection part, or some sports have more common injuries in their sport than others? So that's a reflection of study and what to do from the standpoint of what we're capable of bringing to you in the weight room.
Yes.
But in the end, you take out the longer distances in track and field, you take out some of the longer distances in swimming. Soccer is an interesting combination, but most of the other sports, they're all strength, power, speed sports.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, with the capability of a strong aerobic base because of the duration of activity. I mean, you're not going to train. If I'm training, I like Rafa Nadal. My favorite tennis player is Rafa Nadal. If I'm training Rafa Nadal, I'm not training him for a 3-set match. I'm training him for a 5-set match.
Yes.
And I'm training him to be able to be as close to a relative capacity of strength, power, and speed for the final point as he was from the very first serve of the match. That's for everybody. It's similar in football, similar in basketball. Basketball and soccer, because there's some constant movement, is a little different. Rugby, those sports now, I'm studying rugby a little bit more. But they still have certain components of, hey man, I got to sprint sometimes, right?
That's right.
I got to be able to start and stop.
Yes.
There's a whole different aspect of what you're looking for, different tempo changes. So strength, power, and speed in some, I just answered this question, even in the longer duration sports of like cross country, 800 meter swim, because what does every coach talk about? The final kick, right? The final sprint.
That's right. Right.
You watch these guys who are running the mile, and then they're in the 4th lap, and you're like, golly, this dude's running a faster time than some of some of the 800 guys run.
Yes,
And
right.
again, so there's always going to be some type of component. It's just a matter of how much percentage of training has to be dictated. And then it comes down to what are the correct exercise choices and what exercises need to be more evaluated, I guess is the right word, or more utilized than others. And then the constant rotation to keep building small muscle group areas. Again, another thing I learned in the NFL, I think we missed the boat on, early in that career, like right when we first started and right when I wrote that book, was the big emphasis on prime movers, right? There's no need to train single joint or isolation movements for athletes. But yet, what do we find out later when we really start looking at it? When a guy or a woman gets injured and they're in rehab, they start back off with isolated movements.
That's right.
When you study the top level lifters now, you study like a Louis Simmons's work and now Matt Wenning, when I study those guys, when you look at the way they write programs, what are they doing? They're talking about spending more time on your weaknesses.
That's right.
Generally, those movements are single leg or single arm extension movements to enhance weaknesses. So we missed the boat on that. There is value in isolation or what I call single joint secondary assistant exercises in training athletes, especially if we're going to continue to promote that a quality strength program will help protect and or reduce the risk of injury. I like to use the term protection because injury is a common occurrence.
Yes.
And you never know when, the greatest conditioned athletes of the world, and all of a sudden it's a non-contact injury, right?
Yes.
So it's an interesting concept that I think we've got to be very aware of how we promote our programming. I just think if we program right, we write the right concepts, we over evaluate what the critical factors of injuries are in that sport, and we look at it from how do we protect the athlete. I think there's not necessarily a need for extra training if that stuff's built into the daily plan.
Yeah, you make a couple of really salient points here, and I just want to tell the listeners. I mean, like this is why you have to have a mentor. This is why you need to have somebody who's lived that reality. Not necessarily just wrote about it. I mean, I obviously wrote a book, or researched about it. This is like real life stuff. And one of the things I want to emphasize is the idea of lineage. So I have mentors like yourself. I look up to you. I worked with Tudor for many years. I worked with I worked a little bit with Charlie Francis. I did some stints with Ben Johnson, and so I've had some pretty interesting people also. Louis, I actually spent a lot of time with Louis on the phone. This is before email and stuff like that, so you'd have to use your own dime to call him. And Louis can talk just as bad as I can, so I think he's got the Stanley Cup on that one. But anyways, the other thing you made a couple of points here. The idea and kind of relates to when you're working with the pro athletes versus college. The big concept that comes to my mind is the idea of buy-in, and you are able to do that with these athletes. You're able to get them to buy into your program. And realizing that they came with a set of tools already, and that's this is what we call wisdom, man. This is like you can't learn this in a textbook, okay? That's not, they don't teach you. No study is going to teach you that, okay? The other thing too is the idea of transfer of force or strength from or conditioning elements from the sport to the into the weight room. So it's not always about the weights, and you've kind of addressed this in a few of your talks, that definitely, you are a strength and conditioning coach, but there's a lot of stuff that's developed on the field that you have to be cognizant, and you made a note of that when the guys come off the field versus, and they go in the weight room versus a power lifter. Well, that's their field, right? and the other thing too is you kind of alluded to is the idea that not every athlete has to do a particular lift. For example, when I work with Ben, one of the lifts that Charlie kind of pulled off was the deadlifts. because as soon as they found that it would actually cause, like, he wasn't a very good deadlifter. This is his physiognomy. Maybe you could have, put him on at that time. If you saw the weight room, it was quite primitive, but there were no blocks or risers or stuff like that. So, I mean, the closest thing they came to like a deadlift was a power clean, right? Or a hand clean or something like that. But other than that, they did the squat, bench, some horizontal pull push vertical pull push kind of thing. But other than that, there was no really, the deadlift was not in the picture, which you would think, from some of the stuff I read, they say, well, the deadlift, but maybe that's perhaps the bucket that needed to be filled. I don't know.
Well, it's funny because I know a lot of people now in track and field are gone to more of a priority at deadlift, but back then in the 80s, it wasn't as prevalent as it is now, using a trap bar deadlift with a higher handle. That might have been something that could have been put him in a better position, because center of gravity is different. The ability to push off the ground is way different. The efficiency of the movement is definitely cleaner. And we saw a lot of benefits of utilizing the trap bar deadlift with younger athletes, teaching them how to deadlift first, because sometimes they don't have the mobility to get down and approach a traditional barbell deadlift where the load is out in front of the body. And also, I'll tell you, one of the cleanest things we did with a trap bar, and because it's one of the exercises that I think is, I use the term bastardized, and it's not the athlete's fault. It's obviously the coach's fault for we're not using the right cues to teach. But a lot of times you see an athlete do like a clean shrug pull, and instead of getting vertical, right, and getting the stick, because of the placement and what we're trying to generate force, I call it a pop out, because they pop it off their thighs and the bar travels out rather than up and extend. If you do that same movement with the trap bar, the arms and everything is in perfect alignment, and you get a much more vertical upright pull. When we implemented that exercise with our skilled athletes at the professional level, I'm not saying we saw this tremendous transfer ability, but what we did see was a high level of buy-in to the movement. So that's the other thing, finding the exercise variations off the main sporting choices that we used to use, and finding a way to make it more efficient and in some ways user-friendly, right? Like using a safety bar for a front squat by flipping the bar around for your bigger guys who have huge elbow and wrist and shoulder mobility issues and can't rack a bar. Well, that padded area, that's comfort. Those guys take enough beatings. So when we switched to that, we had a lot of guys who were choosing to do belt squats and some variations of squats that converted back over to doing a front squat with a safety bar variation because of comfort. And they also knew that in their positions, it was a better choice for them as far as their development and keeping their legs as strong as needed to succeed in the NFL world.
Yeah, and I think this is Charlie had a really interesting saying. He said there are no medals in the weight room, and so the idea is that who cares? I know a lot of people focused on Ben's 475 for three days before Seoul, and Charlie's like, if you talk to him, he's like, he just shrugs his shoulders. So what? Big deal. It didn't make. It was actually a fluke because, around the world the weights are in kilos. He thought he was putting on 25 pounds,
and he had 25 kilos.
Yeah, and so he ended up doing that. He's like, he racks the bar, no wraps, just maybe a belt, I think, and just basically does 3 reps with it. And he's like, man, this is heavy, right? And two guys walk in and he's like, you know what you just did, eh? You did 475. He says, oh, okay. And then so that's when Charlie figured out that, hey, you can do upper body weights almost, the day before a competition. It wouldn't affect the speed, right? Whereas you couldn't do that with lower body to a certain degree. But the other the interesting point you brought up too was 2 things. One is the idea of safety, and so you were using basically this idea of what can the athlete do, and the first priority is don't injure the athlete, right? And the second one is now efficiency. what's efficient for this person. And those are two concepts I think that, some people I find, sort of miss. And again, these things you can't learn in a textbook. This is something through the hands-on experience. But I encourage people to reach out to you, because you gotta. The way I learned, anyways, is like you went back, you found the guys who did it, and then you bugged them until they basically gave you a bit of a gem. They dropped you a gem, and then you're like, oh, thank you so much, and you'd come back and you keep bugging them. Eventually, they would start warming up to you, and you have this relationship. And now it's like they come out with a piece of paper, and I'm not knocking that. However, I'm just saying there's a qualitative aspect, there's a quantitative aspect, and I think the quantity cannot trump the quality. I think the quality will give you insight into the quantity, and maybe you want to add to that.
I would say here's two for any coach, regardless of experience. I think the big thing you need to remember is this: just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yes, agreed.
There is no bad exercises. There's just poor application.
Oh, perfect.
I think those two things.
Yep.
If you can remember that, complicated will never beat simplicity.
Yes.
Because again, who are we training? We're training athletes that pertain in a specific sport. We need to make it as simple as possible for them to be the most efficient, because they've got other things that are way more important that are going through their mind.
Yeah. So here's a coach question, coach. At a certain age, and I'm gonna say you're above 50. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. When you get your 20s, you're kind of looking forward into your life, right? But when you get into your 40s, you start looking back. In your 50s, you even start looking further back. And you can say, well, what are the things you know what? I hope somebody, thank God the internet was not around back then. So with that said, what would you have done differently in terms of, okay, let's just start with the high school maybe, and then college, and then, would you have done anything, let's say, I know you had a stint with the Carolina Panthers for 9 years. So elaborate.
Well, you could, when you look back, you say, well, what if I, if I only knew then what I know now, right? Isn't that part of the journey?
Exactly.
So
this is the qualitative aspect. Exactly.
Yeah. So what I would say is, when it comes to the training, what I know now, or what we help develop in the field now, is if I wish I would have understood the concepts of long-term athletic development and what we considered the block zero movement of movement before muscle, so to speak, when I coached high school. I have all the respect for my high school coach, but we were thrown in the weight room with no capabilities. I mean, right. I still can't do a pull-up.
Okay.
I think the most I've ever done in my career was 7 when I was in college, but that's because in the high intensity training model, you did negative chins and dips every workout. So you were going to wind up at some point in time, if you worked hard enough, to be capable of doing chin-ups. And, so I think that we've lost the facts of what's the first thing that we need to be able to control. And I call it internal strength, or body weight strength, right? Before we add external loads. How much better would my shoulders be if I did more crawling, or did more, was able to do pull-ups, was able to do monkey bars better as a kid in the playground? How much stronger would my legs and knees have been if I was exposed to pistol squat variations and split squat body weight squats, instead of walking in a weight room and getting in a squat rack and being so bilateral dominant throughout my career that, I squatted 650 and could only do lunges with 95 pounds. That makes no sense, but that's the way I train. So obviously if you're not training certain aspects of development, they're going to be underdeveloped. So I would say really the overall processing and the learning of the chase, I feel pretty happy with things. But like I said, if I really had to pick certain things out, it would be block zero with the high school athletes,
Right.
starting the block zero concept at the college level earlier, because I always tell a story. Around 1996, I knew we were missing the boat training freshmen. I wasn't looking at it from a 4-year standpoint. I was looking at it more like these freshmen aren't ready and we're throwing them to the wolves. And it took me even more, because I went through Utah and we did it. It didn't take until I got to Arizona State, probably 2003-ish, with when Mark Uyama was still with me, that we finally said enough's enough. These freshmen are not ready. But it took that much time to earn respect of the coaching staffs, to have enough confidence in where you stood in the profession.
Yes.
That you could finally walk in and have merit when you say things like, hey, just so you know, when these freshman football players when they arrive in July, they're not lifting weights for that first 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Or they're not lifting weights the way you would entail them to be. And that's the other one. The other thing I think early on in the coaching of the strength coach, we're always the bad cop. We're the build them up, break them down, build them up guys. And I know that I have I would like to think I've made more of a positive impact on the athletes than a negative. But what I learned in the NFL is communicating. You can communicate and coach athletes hard without being an a-hole.
Mm-hmm.
And I think early on in the strength and conditioning careers of most in the late 80s, early 90s, you were the guy they loved to hate. And a lot of times,
that's right.
as much as they loved you, they saw you as an a-hole.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think I always said, after 9 years in the NFL, if I ever had the opportunity where a coach would think my skill set and my knowledge of what I've seen throughout my 30-year career would have a value to their program, I would be so much better than I ever was my first 19 years I was in college, after being just not on programming, just on communication and experience, how to address certain things, how to deal with certain athletes, how to overlook and to help the coach build a 365-day program for success, on and off the field, on and off the weight room floor, in life in general, just knowing things that really matter versus things that are trivial that we thought mattered. You find out that, that really doesn't matter as much as we thought. You learn the difference, what I call smart hard versus stupid hard. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. So this comes back to this idea of, again, these are qualitative elements that, again, these are things that you're not going to pick up in a research article. These are elements that, okay, I get it. You got to go learn. You got to do this stuff, and you have to have a certain level of competency to do these things. I understand. But I think one of the things that the younger generation, and again, I can't say everybody, but just what I've seen so far, they don't want to sort of look at this qualitative element. Everything comes down to them, and especially now with you have data acquisition with some of these monitoring things and stuff like that. I mean, it gets to a point now where it's almost like, okay, well, where's the human being in all this? And the communication aspect, and you hit it right there, man. It's like you have to be able to communicate, and if you can convince somebody this is gonna, and then you actually show them. I had a gent just come in, a while back from the Bahamas, and he was running a certain time, and within, I had to tell him, listen, like you said, he wasn't qualified to do. And I picked him up from the hotel, and he's already had his gym bag with his spikes and everything. I'm like, we're not going to the track today. And this happened for 4 days in a row. He kept on bringing his gym bag. And after the 4th day, he's like, are we going to go to the track or what? And I go, today we go to the track. And this kind of reminds me of a story with Charlie. Charlie was telling me when he was working with his mentor, was Percy Duncan, and he passed away a while back, God bless his soul. But Anyway, so he found out Percy was in Canada, immigrated, and he came to the track meet, and he met Charlie. Charlie was already a top-ranked sprinter at the time. Percy was the first guy, I believe, that ran under 10 seconds in a 100-yard dash, right?
Huh.
And he represented Guyana. So anyways, long story short, Percy said, let's meet him. I'll meet you at the field. So he met him at the field. He gives him a massage, warms him up, and he says, okay, go home. Charlie's like, we're not going to run? No, not today. He says, come back in about 3-4 days. He comes back, third day, fourth day, he comes back. Same thing happened. He says, okay, go home. And Charlie's like scratching his head. He's like, you're going to run or what? So anyways, he comes back a couple of days later. Percy warms him up, and he does a massage on him. He says, okay, today we run. Knocked off, like, I think 2/10 or something of his 100. and it felt effortless. That's the thing. Like that, and that's the key thing. I think one of the and you maybe I want you to elaborate on this, because I mean, as a power lifter, as also a guy who's in the weight room, and those days where it's you look at the bar, you count the plates, and you say, okay, that's a lot of weight, but then you lift the weight or you do the movement, and it's like, wow, that was good. I probably could add some more. You come back a couple of days later, and man, that even the warm-up weights are like feeling like that.
Well, that's why, although we had it programmed, that's where I came up with what I call the OTS, or off the script. If you see, and that's where we started to push ourselves away from like a specific testing period at the end of a block. Is we just kind of tested within the workout. Like we would be doing, based off Prilipin, we might be doing high level Prilipin, high volume Prilipin with a low rep count. So we do 10 sets of 2 at 85%. And then about set 5, this dude is just smoking it. And we're like, all right, bump him up, right? And then next thing you know, he's doubling his old max. And there's certain things, and with athletes, it's fine to do that. The problem with lifters is you need to hit on game day.
That's right.
And it's like anything else. It's, I remember when biorhythms had come out when I was in high school, and they had these machines that do biorhythms and stuff. And that's where, like, we talked a little bit about the data acquisition.
Yeah. It's called modern day HRV, by the way.
Yeah.
Anyways.
My thing with that is how much are we collecting versus how much are we evaluating, how much are we putting to use? And then there's times with like the readiness apps and things like that, where my concern, and this is where I'm old school, new school, trying to find that middle ground of, I think it's important during training to know certain things about a guy. Like I could walk in and see a guy who just doesn't have it. And like I've always said, a lot of times we come off of a Tuesday off day, go to practice on Wednesday and have a bad practice, only to find out, 6 of our starting vets spent their whole off day with their kids and then had a big foundation event that night. So the Tuesday wound up being a tougher day from a stress level than any practice would be. So, we need to understand that. And I've said this time and time again with some of these apps, we want to do all these readiness apps and figure out the guys' player loads, but are we ever really going to do that on game day? When do you really want the athlete to know that, oh, he's supposed to rest today? And that's where I think the human element and the motivational factors of athletes can never be short-sighted, regardless of what data says. And the one thing that really made me have that thought and have that concept is watching NFL players on the week of a Thursday night game. Because a lot of those guys who play on Sundays, especially your vets, they're still a little banged up called Wednesday and Thursday during the week. And you'd see these guys on Wednesday and you're like, man, we'll play tomorrow. But then you see them on game day and it's go time. Like they just mentally, they can will themselves because they understand what's at stake. Their jobs, getting hurt. You got to play fast and physical, and understanding that winning matters. Like you play to win the game. I mean, that's Herm Edwards quote, but it's the truth. You're not
Yeah.
playing for participation. They keep score for a reason. So
right.
that's where I learned a lot about. I think there's value in readiness, right? Because you can learn a lot about a person. You can learn a lot about what a person sees himself. A lot of times, when you're asking guys like, what's their daily RPE after practice, some guys are always just going to say 5, right? Because they don't really want to tell you they're tired, but you can see it in their eyes. Well, that 5's an 8, but they're just going to do that. Or some guys, every day's a 10, right? So it's one of those things where it's interesting when you're trying to build. Now, I think as you build more trust and reliability with the athlete, and you continue to teach them and try to make them understand the real value of giving us a legitimate number, it helps down the road with adjustments to the plan. I think the one thing that we're getting a little carried away of, and I didn't think of this when I was in the field, it is last year, more this year, and evaluating certain data points that we talk about, we always looked at player load, right? Guys, player load spiked, stress is up, we may need to pull them back. But then we find out things like I was just talking about on a Tuesday. So the question really isn't, do we reduce the load? Is he overstressed or under recovered? And generally what you may find out is the night before or the day before, something was not in his or not in her standard repertoire for that day that it caused a spike in the next day's activity. So there's a lot of things that have to, that's why I said, don't get too robotic with numbers and data, because it's never going to change when it comes to coaching and athletes, the communication and the relationship building. Because like I said, the more they believe in you, the more honesty you'll get. And that'll tell you more than any data metric that may pop up on a heart rate monitor or a GPS device.
Yeah, and who's to say that the athlete doesn't stick that to his put that monitor on his kid, and the kid's like got the HRV of like 100 or something like that. It's like you just and the other thing too is like you have this. I remember when I had my conversation with Charlie. Charlie, I asked Charlie, what do you use to monitor? How do you know the athletes are improving? He goes in his pocket, he whips out a stopwatch.
Yeah.
And he says, listen, if they're running like a tenth or so, a couple of tenths close to their PB, then I know they're improving. If it's they're several tenths below that, then I'm gonna terminate the workout. Or if they hit a PB, for example, even though they have maybe 200-300 meters left in their speed workout, he'll hit it. It's over. It's done. Yeah. You just basically spent your barbell. See you later. Yeah. Whereas some of these people will continue going. And I asked him one time, what do you use to measure body fat? He says, come here for a sec. So he grabbed me on my waist, right? He says, you're about 8%. And he was pretty well spot on. So here's an interesting question here. What would you say, the D1 athletes versus, like, say, junior colleges? Sometimes you get this discrepancy where the D1 guys, academically, they qualify for that reality. But then the junior athletes, junior colleges probably have better athletic potential, but don't qualify. And then with that said, I've had experience working with S&C coaches at the college level. And some of these guys, I would say, they need to kind of follow you, Joe. I think they need to kind of take a weekend with you, a weekend with Joe. I seen the movie about that anyways. But so what would you say, the discrepancies? Here's a guy, here's where you have, extreme talent, but maybe academically not inclined. And the other side, okay, well, if you luck out, you get somebody who's both. But what's your take?
Well, I think you can't. I've seen a lot of guys come from junior college and be successful. Sometimes it's like I always say that nothing matters before puberty, because we've all seen those middle-aged and younger athletes who just supersede their age bracket. And then you have the outliers on the other end that can't get off the end of the bench. And then all of a sudden they're in high school and it's almost completely flipped. I think sometimes when it comes to academics, I think now with testing, when I was in school, who knew what ADHD was, right? You just knew that guy's just hyper kid, man. He's bouncing off the wall, can't pay attention. And now we understand that that's something that's treatable, right? Dyslexia and things like that, and some types of learning disabilities that are I mean, hell, you're getting tested for that sometimes before you even enter schools. So I
Right.
think some of that's being cleaned up, and like anything else, a lot of it's like societal and environmental. It depends on the household. Like when I would say that I was a decently academic guy, but the truth was when I was at home at the dinner table, we talked sports, where somebody else's parents might be talking about what's going on Wall Street. So it all comes down to things like that. So I think sometimes when you talk about academic deficiencies, I think a lot of it is not necessarily 100% on the athlete or the individual, based off of a possible learning deficiency, or the fact that because of whatever it is, societal, environmental, family, they're not as in tune to what's going on. Like I can tell you right now, I live a good life. My grandkids lived with me for 4 years. Now they live down the road, so to speak. But like my grandson is going to be in kindergarten next year, and because he's not been able to go to preschool, he'll be behind because of the fact that he's not been able to interact and get certain things. Now, we do things. My wife does things with him. My son does things with him. His mom does things with him. But it's not on the basis of what kids that are now 5 years old going on to 6 are exposed to. So again, I think there's a lot of things to look at. It's not just necessarily, some guys go to JUCO because they're 6'1", 300, and not 6'5", 300. It's not just academics. There's certain things that lay it out. When I was at Boise State, we had an athlete, and I'll say his name, Alex Toyos, who came from a junior college. He was 6'1", 300, and came to Boise State. And when we were a 1AA football player, but his coach said he was the best offensive lineman on the team, but the other 4 guys he played with were 6'4" or better, and they all went Pac-10, Mountain West, and WAC just on size. So there's another thing, like, why Larry Allen may be the greatest offensive guard in this in the modern era of football. Played for Dallas Cowboys with a 700-pound bench press as a football player. Played
Wow.
at a Division II school. So why was he at Division II? Was it because academically he couldn't qualify, or was he a late bloomer? And again, what is an academic qualifier anyway, right? I've seen a lot of kids that I've went to school with. I've coached a lot of kids that if you give them the right support, you can succeed academically. There's enough programming. There's enough people who want to see athletes succeed. And I've always told guys, regardless of your aspirations as an athlete, especially the scholarship player, if they're paying you to go to school, do yourself a favor and get that degree, because some point in your athletic career, somebody's going to tell you it's a wrap, but you get that degree, no one's coming back to take that degree back from you.
Yeah, and here's this theme again of communication. I mean, this is where I think that's really critical. It's almost like if you want to be, I mean, I would almost say if you want to be a coach or something, or S&C coach, there should be a course on how to communicate, and these possible mock scenarios. I'm not sure. This is kind of threw that out. Be something to develop, to maybe to look into. But I want to get into this idea of training age, and what we call, physical, physical movement intelligence, and as it pertains to, like, say, children. And I know, because growing up, you're same generation to a certain degree. I don't think I spent more, maybe an hour a day at home. I was basically outside doing everything. And I did a podcast with Mark McCoy, is a 110-meter hurdler, and they would just every time there was outside playing. And so kids nowadays, I find they come to you almost packaged. They come off, like, for example, like soccer, they 5-year-old kids that come on the field, they look like they played for Man U. They got all the garb, everything. And I mean, when I played, you had your tennis shoes and the shorts, and you had the socks all the way up to your knees, and you maybe had a shin guard in there, and you hope the guy didn't kick you. But it was somewhat less contrived. There was more informal education and physical education, as well as you had stuff in school. But kids nowadays don't quite get that. And I want your take. And what do you think? How can you improve this?
Well, there's two things and I can't speak for what's going on north of the border, but I can speak on what's going on in the States. Is one, lack of free play, the increased number of young athletes that are in organized sports too soon, and
Agreed.
The fact that we have de-emphasized physical education in the classroom setting of elementary schools.
Well said.
What has happened now is and this is what's leading to the tremendous increase in the adolescent orthopedic injuries we're seeing. And a great example, again, the greatest golfer of the world, Tiger Woods. Would he have been the greatest golfer in the world if he didn't start swinging a club at 4 years old or 2 years old? I don't know that.
Possibly.
No one does. But what I do know is, because he did that same movement pattern for millions of times.
Yes.
And before he even got into training in the Green Berets, did he ever do anything to train that same movement in the opposite plane?
Yes.
And so with free play, you learn things that are not controllable. Like now we teach kids how to land. But you know how we used to learn how to land? Jump off a garage roof with straight legs, and you'll learn you got to bend your knees and absorb force.
Mark told me that he was jumping off like 2 stories, and he would just land, and then they would just roll, and kind of, if you didn't quite make it, you rolled out.
Learn how to jump a fence, right? Yes. Learn how to apply force with your hands so you can spring yourself over a fence, or if a bigger fence, you jump up, put your waist on the bar, and swing yourself over and land and keep running. The things that you saw in a playground and here's the other thing too that no one talks about. Forget about the developmental deficiencies, because everything's backwards. Everything is sport specific first, and then, now we got to get them generally physically prepared. That's why I said most of the kids now, most of them are sport specific athletes and not overall general athletes. The athleticism that we understand is all programmable and machinable and robotic. That's the tough part. The things that are going on are it's tough to train. Like the athletes now that come in, like I had a 10-year-old athlete that came in when I was training them, who was told if he didn't run a specific second, like a specific time from first to second or home to first, he would not be able to make the 10-year-old travel team. And I go, who comes up with this with this stuff?
Jeez.
And here's the thing that we don't talk enough about. Like I said, forget about all the physical attributes that are being lost with no free play. We want to know why these kids have no leadership and understanding of concepts of building teams, is because everything is being told for them now. There's none of that, hey, meet me at the park, and we'll choose up teams. And then it's like, well, somebody's got to be the guy. And then you find out by the guys who fight over who the captains are, who the leaders are. Then you find out who, I don't want to call them followers are, but who the team is. And then you find out the kids that are hiding in the back that don't have the confidence in their capabilities yet. And those are the kids that you have to try to build up. And anybody who's been in that sense has done that.
Yeah.
Nowadays, what happens is you go out to this 5-year-old organized team, and let's just say it's flag football, because that's what I was familiar with my kids. Well, the coach's kid is automatically the quarterback, right? And they're calling all the shots. There is no real competitiveness. It's all participation based. So we've done ourselves a disservice. And as a parent, really what I say is a lot of these 5-year-old groups, and it's really just organized babysitting so that you can get a break.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the next thing you want to know is that same parent's investing $20,000 or $30,000 because they think their kid's going to get a scholarship in an Olympic sport. And we all know, if you're smart enough, that you may get a partial scholarship. So you've invested $100,000 in possibly a $5,000 a year scholarship. So there's a lot of things that, I kind of throw sarcastic jabs at, because I've been in that world, and the investment of, and then, but again, it all comes back to lack of free play, the de-emphasis of physical education. And again, in this day and age is a lot different than we grew up. And I also think it is, and rightfully so, I'm not debating this, overprotective parents who are afraid to let their kids run free.
I agree.
When I was growing up in the town I grew up, especially on Saturdays, like you said, man, you got up, cook breakfast, get out. And for us, it was the 4:30 whistle. The firehouse always blew the whistle on Saturdays at 4:30, and you could hear it pretty much all around the town. And wherever you were, it was like a scatter. When that 4:30 whistle blew off, dudes would like running, jumping on bikes, because it was like you had to be home within like minutes of the 4:30 whistle. But nowadays, that's not happening. When I lived in Arizona, we had a park right across the street, like literally right across the street from our house. And my wife was adamant that if they were over there by themselves, the door was open and she was always checking, or I was out in the garage working out. I mean, you're aware we live in a different world where, because a lot of transient moving, and it's not like it was where everybody knew who you were, right?
Yeah.
Everybody knew your parents and your parents and their parents' parents, and everybody grew up in the same town. You ride your bike. Oh, that's Joe Kenn's kid. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. Hell, you don't even know your neighbors.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that have fallen into it. And that's why, even though I'm not a huge fan of organized sporting at those ages, I still do recommend that if possible, sports like some type of martial art, basic tumbling classes and gymnastics types classes for that age bracket.
Yes.
I don't want them to be a martial artist. I don't want to be a gymnast. But there's a lot of fundamental roles and flexibility and dynamic movements that they're not getting running around in this day and age.
Right. So here's the thing here, along the same lines. There's this idea of brain gym, and it was coined by a lady named Carla Hunneford. And so here's how brain gym kind of works. It's the idea there's about 13, and correct me if I'm wrong, but 13 or 12 different stages of movement development from a child, from its infant, lying on its back, eventually flipping over, lifting up its head, then crawling, etc., all the way to vertical. So that takes about almost 2-3 years to get to that level. Let's say, to get to standing, and you have walking, and then from about 3 or so, whatever, the child is up until about age of 12, 13, they're just working on this gait patterning. And so here, a little story in this book where a couple that worked out in the outback in the middle of Australia. Dad was a auto mechanic. Mom worked in the back office, and between the two rooms, there's this hallway. So they put this kid in a jolly jumper, so mom and dad could see the kid, and vice versa. So the kid would jump up and down, but the kid never learned how to walk properly. So by the time the kid was like 13 years old, he could do math really well, but he had problems with reading. So they ended up taking this kid with 5 people, and they had to repattern the movement of crawling into this kid's brain. And so this idea of too much sagittal movements and not enough free play kind of lends to this idea where now you have kids that don't have this. So kids don't learn cognitive abilities till later on. They live the movement, actually, according to her, is you're developing the information highways by which eventually cognitive information will be expressed through. And so if you miss out developments of this elements of this development, you will impede actually cognitive development. And so what the extreme end of gait would be what sprinting. And the reason sometimes guys have a hard time sprinting is because they spent too much time doing sagittal movements. And again, we can definitely talk about some unilateral stuff, but I would also go back further along the same lines that you're talking about, where they've missed out certain elements of movement that would normally sort of occur formally, informally in play. So here's a question here. So, I mean, I would consider track and field, gymnastics, as you mentioned, swimming. I definitely probably add martial arts in there. I think it's just good for self-confidence, knowing that you can defend yourself, and some sort of skill sport. And so from track and field, you learn coordination, reaction time, jump, run, throw, endurance, sprint, mobility, flexibility. You kind of see the transference of that into gymnastics, as well as you learn about body weight, isometric strength, single leg movements a lot, artistry, and with the swimming, you learn about coordination and breathing, right? So these are the sports that I think are missing at the youth level in a formal sense. So in Eastern Europe, these are the fundamental sports that every kid in that society did. And then they would do this up until the age of 12, 13. And from that, by the time the actual coaches, the other thing too is they had professional coaches in the schools to begin with. But then by the time the guys turned 12 or 13, you had developed an athlete, not just a football player or a baseball player. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a reason why when you watch and you read about some of the situationals over in the Eastern Bloc and how they develop the athletes through the youth system, some of it would look fairly aggressive, like some of the Chinese weightlifting programs that I've seen and how they force stretch athletes and things like that.
Yeah.
But it also, that process too is to help the higher levels weed out the, wash out the untalented and decipher what sports to place those athletes in. So even though there's a little component of a free play and establishing athleticism, so to speak, it's also set up for organizational and nationwide athletic success, because there's a reason why they created the Olympics and everybody wants to be a part of it, because that's to show your country's dominance over someone else's.
That's right. Right. And so what's your thought on posterior development, lateral chain development, anterior chain? I mean, now, we get into all this kind of terms, and then rotational work. I mean, this is something that I find if the child is doing a lot of free play, they develop these things quite naturally. But, it's almost like I have to sort of assess these kids now on these levels to see what they're sort of lacking in. Your take?
Yeah, I think rotational work is definitely not. Let me retrace that. Rotational capabilities is definitely underdeveloped because everything again is in some type of, and I say that in a general sense, right?
Sure.
Because everything is so dominated by the sport of choice that the athlete has been placed in. For as many athletes that continue to be multiple sport athletes as they go through high school, I think there'd be more if the parent wasn't driving a specific sport to a level of success. And I would call it the Tiger Woods syndrome. They saw what happens with a prodigy. Let's face it, when you watch him at 2 years old hit a golf ball, that's a prodigy.
Yes. Yeah.
That's not every 2-year-old is ever going to hit a golf ball like that kid did.
Yeah.
I think that if you can get it, I think that what we have to do is do a better job of educating these youth coaches on overall athletic development so that they're not doing a disservice to the athlete long term. And you get into these clubs. I think some do a better job than others. Like I've been in discussions now where a lot of these clubs, if you pay a certain amount of money to this club, some of it goes to performance training twice a week. But even then, still programmable, right? I mean,
Yes.
I would much rather, I would just much rather, but again, I guess I'm kind of fumbling myself, but I guess in this day and age, that's the way it's going to be. Like what you have to do as a performance coach is try to create free play activities after you've done some of the formal movement patterns, and then let's see if they can figure it out themselves. And that's where you throw a ball out and you tell them, okay, play tag, right?
Yeah.
Play dodgeball, even though that's kind of illegal now, but just types of movement and reactory types of drills that you can test and see how well they can take a formalized, methodical approach to teaching a movement that we all figured out in a park, and see if they can make it a more natural and fluid movement than going through specific steps. Like I teach a lunge with I teach it in a cadence. Like I have a specific way I'm going to teach you how to set up and work the lunge, because one of the things we haven't talked about either too is coordination and balance.
Yes.
That's a lost art too.
Yes.
So when we're doing like iso lunge holds, I have a certain way I'm going to cadence that out. And I always worry myself, like, is this athlete ever going to be able to make that a cyclical movement? So when I do my lunge progression, it goes all the way through where they learn to cycle through as they build this progression of movement from in-place isos to in-place static to forward or moving backwards in a progressive manner into cycling through step by step by step, trying to make it a more natural occurrence. If we can do a better job with our organizations and get that more entailed into the overall development of a club sport, I think we'll be doing ourselves a better service to the athlete overall, whether they do multiple sports down the road or they stick to one and they excel at a high level. Because at the end of the day, the last thing you want is for a younger athlete to break down to a point where they've lost the opportunity to have a career before their career even started or was meaningful.
Right. So there's, along the lines, there's a growing trend. I'm probably sure you heard of Feed the Cats. I forget the coach's name, but there's a trend now of taking football players into track and field. And what's your take? I mean, my thing is, okay, it's kind of a good thing in some ways. And what's your? I mean, as a football player, you'd have probably better insight than me.
Well, I think again, two different sports, right? But the mechanics of top end speed and velocity are important, especially in skilled sports.
Right.
I think there's some merit in having bigger guys learn how to run, right? I always told people when I was in college, the number one way to improve your team's speed is to teach your big guys to run. The fast guys are fast.
That's right. I agree.
But in the end, if we teach our big guys to run, you can drop offensive linemen from a 5.5 to a 5 flat. You're not dropping a 4.5 to a 4 flat.
Yeah.
And when you're evaluating overall team speed, teach your big guys to run and do what you can to fine tune fast guys. And a lot of times the fast guys have a track and field background, so they're already ahead of the game and make your job slightly easier. I think there's a lot of things that track and field from a sprinting standpoint can definitely benefit any sport, right?
Yes.
Absolute speed and top end speed is critical in evaluations. It also helps athletes win. I mean, especially, if you can run fast on a basketball court and then you can learn how to run fast dribbling a ball, you're going to be better than someone who can't. So
Simple.
there's always that component.
Yeah.
So I think there's high value. And again, we're always drawing, right? So as an athletic performance coach, where am I drawing some of my skill set to teach guys how to run from the sport of track and field? Just like we pulled from weightlifting and bodybuilding and powerlifting to build the strength program, a lot of times we're going to build, and that's what, and as you know, where did some of these old conditioning tests come from for some sports? Came from some of the workouts they heard in track and field. Like I was just talking with Dan O'Brien the other day, and we were talking about like a 12 repeat 200 deal. And it was funny because when I got to Boise State, our women's basketball conditioning test was 16 repeat 200s with a break at 8. And a lot of it, when you hear those types of volumes and stuff, that sounds like an off-season program for a 200-meter runner in track.
Yeah. And so so now we kind of get into this idea of track and football. So what would you say about, I mean, you mentioned this in an article a while back. You redefine S&C as a performance enhancement or physical preparation specialist. Give me your take.
So again, when you look at it from strength and conditioning, right, you're talking about two components of what the whole package is of our job. And then when we convert it to sports performance, it's no different than what athletic training did when they flipped to sports medicine. It was more than just taping ankles.
Yes.
I mean, they had to learn how to be the first assessment of possible injury before a orthopedic or a physician's assistant was able to diagnose. And the same thing with strength and conditioning. When you talk about strength, well, like we said, let's just rattle off: starting strength, explosive strength, relative strength, absolute strength, dynamic strength. I mean, you have to be aware of that. What does conditioning really mean? Aerobic based, anaerobic based, glycolytic based, ATP based. What's the right rest ratios for different sports? What are the capabilities? Then it comes into rehabilitation processes. So the whole thing becomes more of a conglomerate of programming rather than specifically being a strength coach. Remember, it all started out as strength coach, right? Well, damn, if they're doing this good in the weight room, maybe you can get them in shape too. And then it became conditioning. And then I think Doc Kreese was the first guy who coined it in the States, speed, strength, and conditioning, because then speed was a component. So there's just so many. Again, strength and I learned the best word I've learned recently was the word construct when I was talking with Pat Ivy, because we have coach speak, right? The world of coach speak, and two of the king coach speak words are culture and mental toughness. But yet, when you talk to different people, it's a totally different definition to others. So really, what those are is, and I figured this out as a summation, but I like what he said. Those terms are constructs of numerous things that can be applied. So I call it like a summation. Like, what is mental toughness? I don't know. What is that? What does that even mean? It means, well, the guy's resilient, right? She works hard. Their commitment to excellence. Okay, well, that's a bunch of unique value, right? And mental toughness and culture, if you listen to some of the things that people want out of that, they're almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of culture do you want, right? Well, I want a hardworking team. Well, what makes you mentally tough? A hardworking SOB. So it's construct. So strength and conditioning is a construct. General physical preparation is a construct. And depending on where your expertise lies, you're probably going to favor your constructs, and how you rate those. How you rate that summation is going to, like my summation of physical preparation specialist from my background is going to be different than yours if we ranked them. Now, we would have some cross delineation, but what I might have 1, you may have 10. And what I have 10, you may have 2. Because again, it's all based off of the background you came from, who you studied under, like you said. So it's and nobody's wrong. See, at the end of the day, nobody's wrong.
That's right. That's a very good point.
So it's to me, it's just become a lot of terms are summation. What I called a summation, what Pat called a construct, and that's how I look at things now. Is just, well, how do you construct the term strength and conditioning? For me, it's more performance based. I'm not necessarily worried about a weight room record if I'm spending too much time with worrying about what a guy squats and not enough time of preparing him to be able to knock a guy off the line of scrimmage. Because the one thing that we have to accept when you're in the team sport modality is the only metric that matters is a one-loss record. So
That's right.
until you understand that, it's just like, again, Charlie Francis could have cared less what Ben Johnson benched that day, because if he didn't win the gold medal, it wouldn't have mattered.
Exactly. And
he didn't train 4 years. They trained 4 years to be a gold medalist.
Yeah. And, his thing was, as long as he was getting faster, and because Tudor designed their strength training program, and the loads they were using were in excess of 85%, from my understand. And so Charlie noticed when they were doing that, the speed was not increasing; it was dropping. So he dropped it down a little bit more, and also because he worked with a large number of athletes, he could always monitor them. So he felt, well, let's keep it around less than 80%. Be like skill strength. They could still kind of maintain their technique. And then as the speed was getting up there, he would just add a little more weight. That's all he would do. And so he would sort of, work with it that way. But here's a quote, and if I can quote you on it, you said in an article, in a recent interview, you said, do you want to be a circus act, or do you want to be Mr. Miyagi? Right?
Yeah. You want to be Miyagi. You don't need bells and whistles to train an athlete for success. It's not hard. I mean, you teach basic fundamentals, and you're going to be successful. An athlete doesn't need parachutes to run fast. A 10-year-old athlete doesn't need to push a sled to run fast. They're probably not prepared to do it. In the end, a quality coach knows the fundamental drills and how to apply them in a systematic fashion for success.
Right. And so this idea, I mean, I've seen on Instagram, I'm not going to mention who, but I've seen this one guy, he's always has his, right now he's showcasing a couple of the Buccaneer athletes who come to him, I guess, doing these push-ups with a weight on his back. And then there's one foot on a medicine ball. And then I don't know where the other foot is, somewhere, I don't know, making tea or coffee or something. But anyways, it's kind of stuff like that. I just look at it, I'm thinking, well, I don't know, this functional training, sometimes I'm not going to say it doesn't have a place, but I think at a certain point in time, it's that curve, like, at a certain point, every exercise kind of loses its, more is not better. And
I think, well, again, I'm not, like I said, man, I don't know. I don't care. Like, I see that stuff and I kind of shake my head, but in the end of the day, I don't know how long that guy's been training with that guy. And is that the spice of life that coach thinks is needed for how he's progressed with this athlete?
Yes.
Would I do something like that? Probably not.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know what the rationale is behind it. And it's not for me to judge, because like we all said, I just don't think at the end of the day, if they played for the Bucs, they got a Super Bowl championship.
There you go. There you go. So with this said here, the idea of what books, there's a bias here, but let's what other books would you recommend the listeners, or YouTube, and maybe some other mentors aside from yourself? What would you recommend to people?
Well, I'm like I said, I think that a lot of, and I'm going to speak more to the coaches on the come up. I know you guys are reading all the books that are out there now. Find the books that came out before that. Like I always say, everybody wants to read about conjugate periodization. Well, why don't you read some bumper stuff on linear periodization? Whether you agree with it or not, or whether you've already been brainwashed or not, everything is based off linear periodization. Even those that are doing the conjugate model are doing 3-week linear waves. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
So I just think that that's important. I think that reading books outside of the genre of the X's and O's is more important. The X's and O's are fairly simple once you get the basics down. I'm a big fan of Patrick Lenciani when it comes to leadership and organization. Any of his books are well worthwhile. from a science standpoint, I would tell you to follow Dr. Matt Ray, who's now the director of sports science, I think is his title at Alabama. He's my go-to science guy. He's the guy that we helped bridge the gap with each other in the early 2000s when we were both at Arizona State. He was working on his doctorate, and he was, I don't want to say he was the first, but he was one of the first younger scientists at the time, if you want to call him that was publishing quality information on undulating periodization. And one of the reasons why Matt and I tried to team up was to give each other recognition in our independent fields. You don't, there's always that kind of battle between science and practitioner. And
Yes.
what Matt and I felt was Matt could give merit to what I was doing from a science background, and I could give merit to some of the things Matt was doing research-wise from the practical background. And we've done several published articles together, and I appreciate Matt for allowing me to be a part of that, or I'd never be in some of the scientific journals that I'm in. So Matt's my guy on that. I think it's always important to sometimes just step away. My wife's made me do this, is read books that have nothing to do with anything you do. Sometimes sometimes you need to read a book without a highlighter and a dog tag, right? Or what I call an dog mark, ear mark the pages. Yeah. I think that's important. I think you need to find coaches who are willing to share with you some of their experiences, life experiences, as well as programming experiences. I think as you're developing your plan, always remember you're going to go through absorb, modify, and apply concept. A mantra that I heard on a subtitle that Dave Tate wrote when he was come back from a Swiss conference on a article he wrote for TMAG back in the early 2000s, I think. And I was like, well, that's how you have to process everything. And I think that's a great way when you go into clinics and you assess the information that you've gathered, is you absorb that content, you try to make some sense out of it, you modify that concept, how it could relate to your program, and then you apply it and you see if it has any merit to whether you're going to keep it as part of a solution or that it didn't merit the use. And I think if you go through that process and a lot of things, you'll wind up having a sustainable program. And that's one of the things that we see a lot of coaches who flip programming too fast because they don't give it enough time to simmer. There's a reason why you want to slow cook stuff, because that's the one thing about training. It's a process, and a process isn't 8 weeks. So if you trained an athlete, a quadrennial athlete for the Olympics, and every 8 weeks you didn't like what was going on and you flipped the switch, well, that athlete will probably leave you because he or she doesn't think you know what you're doing, or they are not going to be very successful. So the process, you have to be able to embrace the process. Everything's a work in progress. And the only way you're going to learn that is by talking to people that have come through the highway that you're looking to jump on. And there's so many books. I mean, I just think read some of the books that I'm not a big fan, like in review of literature stuff. I mean, because sometimes the literature that we're using to review is so old it might be irrelevant. But then what I've learned, some of the things that I recommend are old, and you may think it's irrelevant, but it's not. So go back and find things like I flip through some of Fred Hatfield's stuff all the time, just because, again, before there was accommodating resistance and that process, there was compensatory acceleration training that was coined by Fred Hatfield. And what accommodating resistance did was it enhanced that capability, because it gave excessive loads at lever changes that allowed the bar to continue to accelerate rather than decelerate at a certain point in the lift, where from a safety standpoint, the bar had to slow down because it would have catapulted off your body in a squat or flow through your hands in a press. But what accommodating resistance did, it took advantage of the levers and allowed you to stay in acceleration longer. So
Right.
these are how evolution. People hear accommodating resistance and the dynamic effort method, and again that was termed by Zatsiorski and the 3 methods of strength. But compensatory acceleration training was coined by Fred Hatfield, and that method of dynamic effort method on top of using accommodating resistance was a real key component to enhance compensatory acceleration training. But these are things that, are you willing to take a step back and dive further on to some of the things that happened to get you to understand why what you believe in today is so beneficial?
Yeah, and I think this is really important. We have mentors where, if you as you recommend some of these things, a mentor is somebody that you would bounce these ideas off of, and they would give you their feedback, their real life experience based on that. So tying up here, because we've been on here for a bit, but I could probably ask you a whole bunch more questions, but I'm going to maybe come back for another round if you're available. But I want to tie in this last bit with your involvement with dynamic fitness. That's you can put a plug up in there with the sweatshirt. But just kind of tell the listeners, what's your involvement in that, and what do they do?
Yeah, so Dynamic Fitness is an American-based equipment manufacturing company. So we manufacture equipment for whether it be professional teams, high schools, colleges, clubs, home gyms. We are 6. This could be year 6 or 7. I jumped on last year. I just finished my first year as vice president of performance education, and that's kind of just a generic title. I have several different roles. One would be a brand ambassador, to bring recognition and a name to attach to a quality manufacturing and fabricating company of high process and high level built equipment, and then also to expand from an education to give back to coaches. Coaches are our livelihood for the most part. So we want to do things that can help them be successful by hosting some educational events and being able to do things like that to bring in more information to them on a daily, monthly, weekly basis. So it's a combination of a lot of things. I'm involved a little bit in organizational things such as product pages and development, some R&D stuff on things we're trying to improve on our line, and some things that we would do from a prototype standpoint. So it's kind of a jack of all trades type position, because we built it from scratch and we're still trying to figure out where the percentages of things lie. So it's an all-round base, but the biggest thing is to get involved with good people, right? Our owners are great people. Their story is tremendous, how they became very, very successful in the trailer hitch business, and they wound up moving on to this because our owner got involved with CrossFit for 15 years, and somebody asked him about manufacturing a rig or something to that story, right. and the rest is history. And they created Dynamic Fitness and Strength from their original dynamic fabrication that they had for years. But they were very, very successful in the trailer hitch business. They created a trailer hitch that hit. It was, I think it was the trailer hitch that U-Haul used. So that gives you a little idea of that. And then they ventured into this business, and we're fortunate to have it. We've put together a really, really strong team. We've had a great team on site, the product managers, the engineers, and what they were able to do. And now they've brought in some practitioners and some people that have experience in the genre of coaching and strength and conditioning that can really help promote our brand and hopefully get us more exposure to get an opportunity to compete for some of these tremendous weight rooms that are going on around the country and even overseas.
Right. And so your job on a day-to-day basis is that you're involved a bit in R&D, and I guess you're also involved in talking to people like me, I guess, or
that's part of it. Yep, getting on that. I spend more time on the phone than I ever thought I ever would in my life.
Wow.
Like I've got another call today. I've got to get on a call to help design a room after this. So yeah, it's a lot of phone calling, a lot of the interesting task, again, to help our content manager with our product pages and get our catalog squared away, so that when we can present information to a coach or a individual who has a facility, we have the best quality information that they can make formative decisions with.
Right. So, and where can people get a hold of you if you want to share that?
The best way is to find me on Twitter and Instagram at Big House Power.
Okay.
And then they can reach me through there. And then if you want to reach me through Dynamic Fitness, I have too many emails. It's Joe.Kenn at mydynamicfitness.com. So Joe.Kenn at mydynamicfitness.com.
Okay. And Dynamic Fitness is dynamicfitness.com?
mydynamicfitness.com.
No, but the company itself, if they want to get hold of
Dynamic Fitness and Strength.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right, and so they basically, all they have to do is mention your name and they get a 30% discount. Is that right? Just kidding.
I don't even get a 30% discount.
Joe, I could talk. I mean, we definitely have to do this maybe in a couple of weeks to kind of rest your vocal cords and mine too. But I definitely have some more questions for you, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom, because I mean, that's to me, that's gold. It's like, you can learn stuff, but when you talk to a person such as yourself, of your caliber and your stature, man, it's like talking to the king of all the quickie marts. If you remember watching The Simpsons,
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that we rekindled, because for your listeners, so me and Yusuf talked, like I said, I think it was in 1996, and then we kind of lost base, and then I was actually on LinkedIn about a year ago, and I saw Yusuf's profile pop up, and I go, is this the same guy? And I reached out, and sure enough, it was. And it's crazy how the world works, and thank goodness for the internet and LinkedIn, I guess.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much, and I'm sure hopefully going to get some more feedback. Bring this guy back on. So even if they don't, I don't care. I'm going to bring you back on.
Well, I appreciate it, and I thank you again for having me, and good luck to you. Stay safe.
All right. Take care, Joe.
Bye.
Thank you.
TheSystem.ca podcast disclaimer. We're not here to tell you that we know everything. We're just here to present possibilities. The information presented is by no way intended as medical advice or as a substitute for medical counseling. The information should be used in conjunction with the guidance and care of your physician. Consult your physician before beginning this program, as you would with any other exercise and nutrition program. If you choose not to obtain consent of your physician and or work with your physician throughout the duration of your time using the recommendations given, you are agreeing to accept full responsibility for your actions. By continuing, you recognize that despite all precautions on the part of the system, the art and science of coaching, there are risks of injuries or illness which can occur because of your use of the aforementioned information, and you expressly assume risks and waive, relinquish, and release any claim which you have against the system, the art and science of coaching, or any of its affiliates as a result of any future physical or illness incurred in connection with or as a result of the use or misuse of this information given. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or any other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the system, the art and science of coaching, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the content, please hit the subscribe button. Check out TheSystem.ca for more information on services and more content like this, and also products. Take care.